The latest Korean fantasy thriller is here. Prepare to be blown away. Adapted from a wildly popular webcomic and featuring an all-star cast, this is one of the most anticipated fantasy suspense dramas of the past 5 years. Let's jump right in. Our protagonist, Yi-Cai, witnesses a chilling car accident on the street. To his shock, the victim is flung right in front of him, clutching tightly to Yi-Cai's shirt in their final moments. The unsettling encounter leaves Yi-Cai visibly shaken, even as he sits in a crucial job interview later, lost in thought. He doesn't hear the interviewer calling his name not once, but 3 times.
죄송하지만 질문을 못 들어서요.
Unsurprisingly, he doesn't get the job, but that's just the beginning of his troubles. Already deep in debt, Yi-Cai's chances of finding suitable work dwindle further. To make ends meet, he juggles multiple part-time jobs while enduring harsh criticism from customers. As his peers land cushy office jobs, Yi-Cai finds himself eating a solitary midnight snack on the streets, weighed down by the crushing realization that his countless interviews always end in failure. The uncertainty of his future eats away at him, yet he holds on to hope, telling himself things will improve. Fast forward a few years, Yi-Cai musters the courage to apply to a prestigious company once again. The interviewer acknowledges his lack of professional experience but praises his dedication, as shown by the certifications he's earned through sheer discipline.
최희재 씨, 멋있어요.
Yi-Cai is overjoyed, finally feeling like he's on the brink of success. However, his happiness is short-lived. Moments after leaving the interview, he receives devastating news. A trusted friend has scammed him out of his hard-earned savings. He rushes to confront them, only to find their home completely emptied. Broken and desperate, Yi-Cai turns to his longtime girlfriend, Ji-Soo, for comfort only to discover she has seemingly moved on with someone new. His heartbreak deepens when she hands him a wad of cash, an act of pity rather than support.
너 남자 생겼냐?
아니야.
그만 헤어져 줄까?
더 열심히 살아야겠다는 생각은 안 들어? 언제까지 이렇게 살 건데?
He feels like an unbearable burden, despite his relentless 15-hour workdays. Their relationship, he realizes, has become toxic and unsalvageable, struggling to maintain his dignity. Yi-Cai silently returns the money, but life isn't done testing him yet. When Yi-Cai arrives home, he finds his belongings dumped outside and the door locked. The landlord, fed up with unpaid rent, has repossessed the apartment. Yi-Cai spends the entire night sitting in the rain, alone, with nowhere to turn. The next morning, Yi-Cai wakes up to the shattered pieces of his life, feeling utterly lost. Unexpectedly, he received another interview notification from the company but was rejected yet again. His hopes rise briefly, only to be dashed again as he's rejected once more. This final blow becomes the breaking point. Consumed by despair, Yi-Cai climbs to the rooftop and leaps. But something strange happens. Instead of death, he finds himself aboard a luxurious private jet. Confused, he wonders, has the afterlife gone upscale? And whose face is this in the reflection? Before he can process it, a woman appears, calmly reading what turns out to be his suicide note. She introduces herself as the Grim Reaper. Yi-Cai, dumbfounded, listens as she explains, "Yes, you've died. Now, it's time to face the consequences." The Grim Reaper then removed her glasses, and in an instant, the two were transported to an endless purgatory. Still in shock, he demands an explanation. The Reaper responds coldly, "You insulted life by throwing yours away. Such disrespect for death deserves punishment." Before Yi-Cai can argue, she grabs him by the throat and drags him before a horrifying crowd of demons and tortured souls. Yi-Cai, trembling, realizes he's in way over his head. Without mercy, the Reaper hurls him into the abyss of the underworld. Fortunately, the hellish scene was nothing but an illusion. The Grim Reaper, now standing before Yi-Cai, delivered chilling news: "You will face death 12 times. Each time, your soul will enter the body of someone moments away from dying. You will feel their death as punishment. But here's the catch: if you can prevent the body's demise, you'll live on." A rare mercy from the King of Hell. Before Yi-Cai could respond, he found himself in a new body, the son of a powerful conglomerate CEO, none other than the company he had recently interviewed at. A wealthy heir, this man had lived a life of luxury, with 3 private jets and riches beyond imagination. For a moment, Yi-Cai's heart leapt. If he could save this body, wouldn't that mean inheriting this dreamlike life? But his hopes were short-lived. Flames suddenly engulfed the left engine of the jet he was aboard. Before Yi-Cai could react, the aircraft plummeted and exploded in a fiery inferno, taking him with it. He woke up once more, only to find himself back in the underworld. The Reaper stood nearby, smirking. How does it feel to die again?
그 총알들은 뭐야?
네 남은 죽음 횟수. 이걸 네 머리에 쏘면 다시 시작되는 거.
Pulling the trigger of a phantom gun, this time, Yi-Cai woke in the body of an extreme sports athlete, a daredevil who held 4 world records. This man's life was one of constant danger and high stakes. Today, the challenge was unprecedented, a freefall from 8,000 meters without a parachute, aiming to land precisely in a safety net. The event, broadcast live on television, was attracting massive viewership. The stakes were even higher than before. If he succeeded, he'd win 3 billion Korean won in sponsorship money. Desperate to survive and intrigued by the reward, Yi-Cai pushed himself to master the athlete's skills. As he plummeted toward the net, the world watched. Ratings soared, and the tension was palpable.
20%! 다 왔다! 내가 꼭 성공해서 30...
As Yi-Cai braced himself, the Grim Reaper smirked and fired yet another shot at his forehead. This time, he found himself in the body of a 17-year-old high school student. At this moment, a classmate was browsing short videos on their phone, and to Yi-Cai's astonishment, the #1 trending video was from his previous life, the failed freefall stunt. Before he could react, a memory crystal appeared, flooding Yi-Cai's mind with the life story of his new host. This boy was a target of relentless bullying, scorned by classmates, and tormented by the school bully, Jin-sang, raised by a single mother after losing his father at 5. The boy endured the daily hell of school to avoid worrying his hard-working mom. The constant harassment had warped the boy's perspective. He began to see his classmates as grotesque monsters, turning his school into a personal purgatory. One day, overwhelmed, he penned a suicide note and headed for the rooftop only to have Yi-Cai take control. Reading the note, Yi-Cai felt an eerie sense of familiarity. Their struggles mirrored each other, only in different worlds, his in society, the boys in school. But then Yi-Cai realized something. The boy's death was by suicide. If Yi-Cai could resist those dark thoughts, he might cheat death entirely. Elated, he burst into laughter, until Jin-sang and his lackeys beat him up again. Fuming, Yi-Cai, a grown man mentally, decided he wouldn't take this lying down. Grabbing a chair, he charged at Jin-sang, yelling, "Stand in my way and die." With moves straight out of a Bruce Lee movie, he fought back fiercely until another thug, Tae-suk, stepped in and overpowered him. Yi-Cai had forgotten one key detail. He was now in the body of a scrawny teenager, beaten and humiliated. He had no choice but to endure. That evening, the abuse continued, but Tae-suk unexpectedly stepped in, stopping Jin-sang from going too far. However, Jin-sang slapped Tae-suk, warning him that showing mercy undermined his authority. Yi-Cai, overhearing this, began to see an opportunity. By exploiting the tension between the two bullies, he could turn the tables. The next day, Yi-Cai started planting seeds of doubt, praising Tae-suk's strength and questioning why someone as powerful as him let Jin-sang boss him around.
진상이랑 1대1로 싸움 이겨? 이 새끼가 갑자기 무슨 개소리야?
Is it fear? He teased. The plan worked, and Tae-suk revealed the truth. Jin-sang's authority came from his older brother Song Hyup, a notorious high school delinquent. Realizing Jin-sang was nothing without his brother's reputation, Yi-Cai crafted a bold scheme. Yi-Cai promised to help Tae-suk rise to become the leader of the area. He warned Tae-suk to stay out of his next confrontation with Jin-sang. The showdown came during lunch when Jin-sang slapped Yi-Cai. Calmly, Yi-Cai poured his noodles over Jin-sang's head, igniting outrage. This time, Tae-suk not only refused to help but also stood by with the other classmates. Watching coldly, humiliated, the bully immediately ran to his powerful backer, hoping they would step in to crush the audacious Yi-Cai. When Song Hyup arrived, flanked by his gang, he took one look at the puny Yi-Cai and lost interest. "We came all this way for this?" He scoffed. mocking Ginseng for needing help against such a weakling. Song Hyop left, leaving Ginseng humiliated and abandoned. Yi-Jae had anticipated this reaction. Without his brother's protection, Ginseng lost his standing as the school's top dog. Tae-suk, seeing the tides turn, immediately aligned with Yi-Jae.
나 말했지. 한 손으로도 이긴다고.
From that day on, Yi-Jae was untouchable, and Ginseng became the school's outcast. Even Ginseng's dream girl, the class beauty, ridiculed him. Broken and desperate, Ginseng snapped. After school, Ginseng ambushed Yi-Jae from behind, striking him with a brick and delivering a fatal blow. Yi-Jae's vision darkened, and once again, he found himself standing before the Grim Reaper. Yi-Jae's fourth life began in chaos. He was a low-level gangster tied to a chair, being brutally tortured. The gang's boss loomed over him, demanding the location of 10 billion won in cash and a woman he had apparently hidden. Terrified, Yi-Jae stammered that he'd talk but needed time to think. The boss, however, suspected a stall tactic. In truth, Yi-Jae wasn't stalling, he was waiting for the memory crystal to arrive. Just as the boss raised a hammer to crush his hand, the crystal appeared. Memories flooded back. This version of Yi-Jae had been the gang's top enforcer, a ruthless hitman with a trail of blood behind him. However, his most beloved woman had been mercilessly abused by the same boss. Unable to tolerate it any longer, he betrayed the gang, took the woman, and stole 10 billion won from the organization. Their escape, though, was short-lived. The gang's assassins had tracked them down. Now fully restored with his deadly skills, Yi-Jae sprang into action, channeling Bruce Lee-like precision. He took out the goons in an instant, leaving them groaning on the floor. After all, he was the gang's best enforcer. Dealing with these henchmen was child's play. Though Yi-Jae didn't relish his role as a gangster, the allure of the stolen fortune was too tempting. He resolved to recover the money and send it to his mother, but before he could act, the gang unleashed their top killers to hunt him down. Yi-Jae, now a lone wolf, sped across a bridge on a motorcycle, pursued relentlessly. The chase escalated when a massive truck blocked his path. Yet, in a twist of luck, Yi-Jae maneuvered through a narrow gap, causing the pursuing cars to crash spectacularly. Thinking he'd bought some time, Yi-Jae pressed on only to find himself cornered again. In a last-ditch effort, he drove his motorcycle into a shopping mall, weaving through stunned shoppers, and eventually reached the rooftop. With no escape in sight, Yi-Jae made a daring leap off the roof on his bike, plunging straight into a swimming pool below. Emerging unscathed, Yi-Jae felt invincible. He had the money, the woman, and the thrill of survival. For the first time, life felt complete. The woman tearfully embraced him and asked, "Where's the money?" Without hesitation, Yi-Jae pointed to a nearby boat, but the moment he did, her expression darkened. In the blink of an eye, the woman betrayed him. Yi-Jae once again woke up in the underworld. The Grim Reaper sneered, "Still such a simpleton. You can outfight men, but you'll never figure out a woman's heart." Before Yi-Jae could even argue, she pulled the trigger once again. Yi-Jae's new life began behind bars, but luck seemed to be on his side. He overheard from a fellow inmate that he'd be released in just 4 days. The inmate kindly warned him to keep a low profile, avoid trouble, and most importantly, steer clear of a psychotic prisoner who could be deadly. But Yi-Jae's jaw dropped when he found out who the psychopath was: Ginseng, the very bully who had smashed him with a brick in a previous life. Rage boiled over. Without hesitation, Yi-Jae threw a powerful punch, following it with a brutal kick that sent Ginseng sprawling. The other inmates stared in shock. Just then, the memory crystal arrived, flooding Yi-Jae with the memories of this life's host. This version of Yi-Jae was a boxer with dreams of becoming a professional fighter. However, his family was drowning in debt, and his future looked bleak. That's when a rich kid approached him with an offer: take the fall for a car accident that had killed a girl, and he'd be paid 200 million won. Desperate to ease his mother's burdens, Yi-Jae agreed. Initially, he received a lenient sentence, just probation. However, when the girl unexpectedly died, Yi-Jae's sentence was changed to 2 years in prison. Shattering his dreams, he demanded 1 billion won as compensation, threatening to expose everything once he was released if they refused. Unfortunately, the rich kid was ruthless, deciding that silencing him permanently was cheaper than paying the money. As for Ginseng, His psychotic behavior was just a front to avoid being targeted in prison. Realizing the absurdity of the situation, Yi-Jae couldn't help but laugh. Then, without hesitation, he exposed Jin-sang's act to the entire prison.
그렇게 속이고 센 척하면서 편하게 지내고 있었구나.
Furious at being deceived, the inmates united to give Jin-sang a severe beating. For a few days, the prison was unusually calm, and Yi-Jae focused on staying under the radar, eagerly counting down to his release. But peace didn't last. One day, a fellow inmate suddenly dismantled a power saw, turning it into a deadly weapon. Fortunately, Yi-Jae reacted quickly, causing the saw to rebound and fatally strike the inmate instead, ending his life on the spot. That's when the horrifying truth came out. These inmates weren't just random convicts, they were hired killers sent by the rich kid's family to ensure Yi-Jae didn't leave the prison alive. With no choice, Yi-Jae prepared for an all-out fight. Fortunately, in this life, Yi-Jae was a top-tier martial arts expert. With just a few swift moves, he knocked down every attacker. Finally, the day of his release arrived. However, the rich kid's lawyer was already waiting at the gate with a suitcase full of cash. But at this point, Yi-Jae had no interest in the mere billions being offered. He knew where the 10 billion was hidden. Without hesitation, he bid the lawyer a quick goodbye and walked off. The lawyer stood there, utterly baffled. Yi-Jae later arrived at the seaside, the very place where, in a previous life, he had been betrayed and killed by that woman. He boarded a small boat and rowed to a secluded island, where he unearthed the 10 billion won he had buried earlier. It turned out the money wasn't on the boat, it required a trip to the island to retrieve it. Yi-Jae divided the cash into 2 bags, one to support his mother in this life, and the other placed in a high-speed rail station locker for safekeeping. But just as he was heading home, tragedy struck again. He was ambushed, stabbed in the back by none other than the inmate he had trusted most during his time in prison. Despite all his careful planning, fate had the final word. This life, too, came to a bitter end. Yi-Jae soon found himself back in the underworld, urging the Grim Reaper to hurry up with his next reincarnation. With a sly grin, she pulled the trigger again. When Yi-Jae opened his eyes, he was stunned to discover that in this life, he had become a baby. But there was a serious problem. The high-speed rail locker could only store items for 4 days. If he didn't retrieve it in time, it would be lost forever. A grown man's mind trapped in a baby's body. Yi-Jae quickly realized his predicament, especially when he noticed the short-tempered woman who was now his mother.
계신가요?
His new mother seemed furious, storming back into the house and tossing him onto the couch before snapping at her husband to feed the baby. Fortunately, the father appeared kinder and more reasonable. However, when he inspected the baby food, he hesitated, saying it looked expired. Whatever, it won't kill him, the mother snapped. Reluctantly, the father began preparing to feed Yi-Jae.
맛있다. 맛있어.
안 먹어!
뱉지 말라고 확 시작. 집에 왔으면 좀 편하게 좀 있자 이 새끼야.
But before he could, there was a knock at the door. It was the police, accompanied by a child protection specialist. The father quickly wiped the baby's mouth. Looking visibly nervous, the officer explained, "We received a report of potential child abuse. This is our child welfare specialist." The mother adamantly denied the allegations, but the officer continued, "During a recent hospital visit, doctors noted signs of physical trauma on your child. They're the ones who reported it." Ignoring the protests, the police entered the home. The couple exchanged uneasy glances as the specialist prepared to examine the baby. The father tried to explain, insisting they'd never harm their child. He even revealed that he worked for a children's welfare organization. The officer, noticing the family portraits on the wall, seemed unconvinced that they were abusive. When the specialist's examination revealed no visible injuries, the police decided to move on to another case.
안 돼!
But Yi-Jae, trapped in the baby's body, knew the truth. He panicked as the officers left, unable to communicate in baby babble. As soon as the door closed, the couple's demeanor shifted. The mother threw Yi-Jae harshly onto the floor. "Ever since this kid was born, everything's gone wrong," she ranted, blaming all her misfortunes on the baby. Moments later, Yi-Jae found himself back in the underworld. Defeated once again, Yi-Jae was furious, unable to comprehend how such terrible parents could exist. The Grim Reaper, however, remained unfazed. "This world doesn't operate on fairness," she said. "As an adult, you had the privilege of choice. That poor child didn't even have that. And sadly, parents like these are far more common than you think." Frustrated, Yi-Jae begged her to just pull the trigger and move on to the next life. But the Grim Reaper shook her head. "No need to rush. No matter how much you struggle, you can't escape your fate." Then, with her trademark smirk, she pulled the trigger once again. Yi-Jae soon found himself on a bustling street, and a quick glance at his phone reminded him that today was the last day to retrieve his cash from the high-speed rail locker. Luckily, he was near Yongsan Station. He sprinted to the station and reached the locker just in time. Fortunately, the cash was still there. Looking at the unfamiliar face in the mirror, Yi-Jae couldn't help but joke, "This guy looks way better than me." Then, he noticed a nearby poster his current body belonged to a celebrity. A memory crystal flew toward him, and Yi-Jae realized he was now a 24-year-old model, blessed with stunning looks. He had been adored by women and envied by men. Over time, he became a top model, wealthy and successful, with a luxurious mansion and a collection of expensive watches. Turning to a nearby table, Yi-Jae saw a newspaper. The headline reported that the abusive parents from his previous life had been sentenced to prison. Poetic justice, he thought, but he was curious, how had this seemingly perfect man died? Before he could delve deeper, his phone rang. A friend reminded him of a party that night, promising a room full of the most beautiful women in Korea. Yi-Jae, now fully in the mood, replied, "On my way." At the party, Yi-Jae drank himself into a stupor. Amid the festivities, the host made a grand entrance. Yi-Jae froze. It was his former interviewer. The host, unimpressed by Yi-Jae's drunken state, ignored him completely. Unbothered, Yi-Jae continued to party. The next morning, Yi-Jae's older brother summoned him to a cafe. Unexpectedly, Jisoo, his ex-girlfriend from a previous life, appeared. Yi-Jae tried to steal glances at her but didn't know how to start a conversation. To his surprise, Jisoo approached him to order a drink, causing him to fumble nervously. Yi-Jae later discovered that Jisoo frequented the cafe, and he made it a habit to wait for her there. To connect with her, Yi-Jae struck up a conversation about books, mentioning that he admired her work after accidentally discovering her name on a cover. He then shared a story idea, a fictionalized account of his reincarnation journey, carefully omitting anything personal between them. Jisoo was captivated. She said, "This is so vivid. It's like it happened to you."
본인이 직접 겪은 것처럼 리얼하게 얘기를 잘하시네요. 주인공의 감정도 자세하게 묘사하고. 근데 그 죽음이라는 캐릭터는 좀 너무하긴 하네요.
그쵸? 와, 진짜 걔 완전 미친년이에요.
Yi-Jae's complaints about the Grim Reaper made Jisoo burst into laughter. When Yi-Jae asked for her autograph, he noticed her pen and froze. It was the same pen his mother had given her the day he died. Jisoo's eyes welled with tears, and the emotional moment lingered. From then on, Yi-Jae shared more of his story with Jisoo, recounting every death like chapters in a serialized novel. Jisoo was moved by the main character's fear of facing his mother, a feeling so raw it felt personal. As Jisoo left one day, a sudden downpour began. Yi-Jae appeared with an umbrella, and she started to feel a growing affection for this familiar yet mysterious man.
내일 봐요.
네.
But tragedy struck again. Later that day, Yi-Jae saw police cars and ambulances rushing past. He overheard that a frequent cafe visitor had been in an accident. Panicking, Yi-Jae ran out to find Jisoo unharmed but shaken. She helped him bandage a minor injury he'd sustained while rushing to her.
아까 건우 씨 뛰어오는 모습 봤어요.
제가 아는 사람이라고 착각해서요.
건우 씨한테 많이 소중한 사람인가 봐요. 건우 씨 같은 모습이지 않았을까 생각했어요.
그날이요?
It turned out Jisoo was talking about the day Yi-Jae jumped off the building. Yi-Jae had no idea how to comfort her because the person who had died was none other than himself. Before leaving, Jisoo said she wouldn't be returning to the cafe. Listening to Yi-Jae's story had reminded her too much of her late boyfriend. Saddened, she quietly left. The next day, Jisoo visited Yi-Jae's grave.
미안해.
Hidden nearby, Yi-Jae watched, his heart breaking. After Jisoo left, he quietly went to his own grave, overwhelmed with sorrow. When his mother appeared at the cemetery, Yi-Jae stepped forward, pretending to be a friend of her son's. Watching her grief tore him apart. and he decided to anonymously send her the billions he had retrieved. That evening, Yi-Jae met with Jisoo again.
전 건우 씨의 이야기가 꼭 해피엔딩으로 끝났으면 좋겠어요.
왜요?
항상 두려움에 떨고 있잖아요. 두려움에 떠는 인생은 진짜 인생이 아니잖아요.
Summoning all his courage, he began to tell her the truth.
최이재예요.
그게 무슨...
지수야. 믿기 힘들겠지만 나 정말로 최이재야.
최이재...
But before he could finish, a speeding car plowed into them both. Once again, Yi-Jae awoke in the underworld, overwhelmed by grief and frustration. This time, he made a bold decision, to be continued.